That is why Mishima is fascinating. Because, maybe not entirely, but just possibly for one moment, the boundary between fiction and reality was obliterated. Better than food, man. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. How's it going? Get that coffee. Oh, yeah. Old favorite. So today is Star by Yukio Mishima. If I had to summarize this book in a sentence, it's a horror story about aging. I'd expect nothing less from Yukio Mishima. All of his themes, fears, and insecurities reside in this short first-person novella. Less than 100 pages, lightning fast. And all the more fascinating because we know how the real-life story ends. And if you don't, if you're new, if you haven't had the pleasure of reading one of the greatest authors in Japanese history, if you don't know that he killed himself in a way that is, to this day, 50 years later, still difficult to believe, well, stay tuned. So this one would be good if you were wanting to get into Mishima without making a big commitment. It's like a consolidated collection of his ideas, of his themes, and it's not as good as some of his other novels, for sure, but it's, if you have never read him before and you're wondering, I don't know if I want to spend that much time with this, this would be a good, easy entry into the ocean of blood that is Mishima's prose. If you want to get in and get out, you're not going to have too much of a commitment, and if you're like, this is not for me, well then leave. No, but if you don't like Mishima, it's fine. But if you're new to his stuff, you're unsure, I suggest you try this one out first. It's more cynical than Confessions of a Mask, no doubt. It is almost to be assumed without question that many of the difficulties found in this 23-year-old movie star's life, our protagonist, were Mishima's own, at least in part. There is more than a little autobiography in here, if we are to believe what we've been told or read. In addition to being a famous author, Mishima also starred in Yakuza movies, so he's pulling from first-hand experience in this book. Star is narrated by the 23-year-old movie star Yukio Mizuno. A man so popular he's being harassed by schoolgirls and everybody just loves him. He's starring in cliché Yakuza movies and being sent sexually explicit letters by fans. One guy is desperately trying to get his underwear. And above all else, of course, he wants to die. Classic Mishima. I mean, living the life he is, it's understandable. Coming after Confessions of a Mask, but before Sun and Steel, in Star, you can clearly spot the evolution of Mishima's thought, or maybe decline. But this was published in Japan in 1961, and in English for the first time last year. For the first time in 2019. Many thanks to Sam Bett, the translator. Very nicely done. This one is demented. It's a total precursor to American Psycho. I mean, this is straight from the mouth of Patrick Bateman. First person narration, he's talking about his obsessive fans. I was their model and their aspiration. I'll just do the nasal Bateman. The mold that gave them shape. I made a point of remembering this whenever I peeked into my assistant's little mirror. My reflection was boyish and alive, but all the life was in the makeup. Since my face looked a little greasy, I applied some more powder, but I knew that there was nothing shining underneath. My physique was rugged and my build was solid, but the old power was escaping me. Once a mold has finished casting its share of copies, it cools and becomes deformed and useless. Here I was, 23, an age when nothing is impossible, yet I knew for certain that the last 6 months of working days on end with barely any sleep would be the farewell to my youth. Right? He's a classic narcissist who wishes to die. The Mishima archetype, cold, superficial, arrogant, and wearing all kinds of masks. Masks are a consistent metaphor when discussing Mishima, and they come into one of the last lines or sections of the book, which is terrific. Rikyo's assistant, Kayo, an older woman with 2 silver front teeth, is his lover and confidant. So you have this strange portrait of a relationship. He makes a point of saying that, even though there are all these women obsessing over him, he chooses this one who is much older than him and who nobody would suspect he'd be with and who is ugly. And she is very proud of that contrast in a way. There's something she's enjoying about the deceit, and she's handling his PR and shit, and so that it's almost like they're criminals, like they're doing something illegal together, and so they have this kind of strange bond and these interesting conversations. There's a little narrative. It's more of a long short story, a moment in time, as a young man works up to the gradual realization that he too will succumb to the relentless process of natural decay, that his pretty features will rot. So he increasingly has this urge to die, this deep-seated desire to end this exhausting life of being famous at only the age of 23. Mishima got famous when he was young as well. He was like Schrader was saying in this review, he's a prodigy. I don't usually read more than once from a book, but some of these lines are just fucking stellar. He tells Kaio, his assistant, he says, "Get off me, I want to die." She says, "Of course you do. Who wouldn't, with a life like this? So go ahead and die. But listen, Rikyo, it has to be an accident. Something that catches you totally off guard. If you're thinking about dying in some fantastic blaze of your own making, forget about it. Has the gaze of reality you're so fixated on finally started getting to you? Do you want to be human now like everybody else? Stop being so predictable. The real world can't wait for you to die, and maybe for me too. That's its plan. It wants to cleanse the planet by eradicating everything that contradicts its vision. Consider why you're still alive. This power you get out of being seen is just a way of playing by reality's rules and doing what they ask of you. In exchange, they let us have our secret life together, and especially the faith behind the artifice, because they know that a convincing sense of reality can only be born from an unholy faith. For a star, being seen is everything, but the powers that be are well aware that being seen is no more than a symptom of the gaze. They know that the reality everyone thinks they see and feel draws from the spring of artifice that you and I are guarding. To keep the public pacified, the spring must always be shielded from the world by masks, and these masks are worn by stars. But the real world is always waiting for its stars to die. If you never cycle out the masks, you run the risk of poisoning the well. The demand for new masks is insatiable." He's a great writer. He's a fantastic writer. Was. So the story finally culminates when Rikyo meets an actor much more famous than he in a barbershop, an actor who was famous way back when. A handsome man who was past 50. Said he was famous in the silent era. But Rikyo realizes he was a living god, male beauty sublime, incapable of doing wrong, but he had committed one great sin, the sin of growing old. The sin of growing old. When one first learns about Mishima, there are so many strong emotions that immediately stand out. And then later, there are more increasingly strong emotions that gradually reveal themselves. It is both a fascinating and horrifying story. The man is truly unto himself, because in both respects, the positive and the negative, you ask yourself, how can one man do that? How can he accomplish his works of art? I mean, the volume of his output is insane. And of course, the other side, how can one man cut his stomach open at the age of 45 and have accomplished all of these things prior? It boggles the mind. I feel abysmally lazy by comparison. There's a terrific interview with Paul Schrader on the Dick Cavett show that I found while researching for this review. Paul Schrader, who wrote the screenplay for Taxi Driver and directed the film Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters. And in the interview, which I've linked to below, Schrader says, "Believe me, the Japanese do not understand him either. He is as unfathomable to them as he is to us, Westerners," is what he means. Perhaps more so because they feel they should understand him. He was a prodigy of a writer and wrote very quickly and became famous very young, and then grew disenchanted with words themselves and gradually turned himself into one of his own characters, one of his own creations, and so that his final work is his death. Schrader goes on to say that he believes that Mishima was actually a functioning schizophrenic, that he was able to kind of just switch back and forth between all of these different states of mind or personalities or something like that. Does anybody else think that Dick Cavett is like the fucking shit? I think he's like the best. And another very interesting thing they discuss, the Japanese did not discuss him for a while after the death. Mishima was basically the ultimate individual in that culture. The reactive individual against the collective. He did not go along with what they would want. And as Schrader says, and I've heard this before, the Japanese motto is the nail that stands up will be hammered down. It's about the group, right? And if you've ever been to Japan, you'll immediately understand and witness that dynamic. Mishima was not about the group. Mishima, as Schrader said, made sure that he would never be hammered down throughout his lifetime, and then, with his death, throughout history. You can say whatever you want to about Mishima, and it will partially be true. But it's not the whole story. There is no other figure I can think of that is more of a, perfect definition of a contradiction. And maybe that's what's fascinating about him. And that makes me very sad too, because you can only imagine how this guy was suffering on the inside. I think it would be incorrect to paint a portrait of Mishima as a victim, but there is that quality when you take into account everything that is available about his history. But again, you can see where things were going when you read Star. It was all there. It was all in his, I mean, he basically just spelled it out. So if you don't know the story, here we go. Yukio Mishima was an extraordinarily talented and famous Japanese writer, a prodigy. He was at one point the most famous author in Japan, I believe, and began to lean further and further right the older he got, politically, and began weight training religiously, developing an impressive persona. He was entirely fixated on the idea of dying. Though married, he was also gay. Definitely gay. And his breakout novel, Confessions of a Mask, was a portrait, largely autobiographical as well, of a young gay man in Japan, in a time where it was very socially unacceptable to be so. However, Mishima's growing obsession with the samurai code and nationalism historically goes together with homosexual relationships. The history of the samurai and all that. Look it up. Combine this with the overwhelming theme of death in his novels, and you have one hell of a character who was beginning to actually emerge into real life. I mean, you couldn't write a better story. And that is actually something I read in an LA review of this book, Star. So the fellow Jan Vil something, I'm forgetting his name, sorry. He wrote that, like it was basically a shame because Mishima's real life, as far as a plot for a book, was even better than anything he'd written. His life is fucking extraordinary. And it was not long, it's kind of like Rimbaud, one of these literary figures. That is why Mishima is fascinating. Because, maybe not entirely, but just possibly for one moment, the boundary between fiction and reality was obliterated. And that is fucking insane. So he's connecting some interesting dots, and what came next cemented him in literary history, as if his literature hadn't already. It had, but then he committed suicide. In the most outrageous fashion of any writer ever, to my knowledge. Period. He staged a coup at a military base in Tokyo with his homemade far-right militia, whom he trained himself. They had their own uniforms and everything. They went in there, stormed the gates, tied up the general, and he walked out onto this elevated platform and gave a speech to these gathering soldiers below, trying to inspire them to rise up, go back to the old ways of the emperor. And he failed. They couldn't even hear him. They were like laughing at him and heckling him. And then he went back inside and committed seppuku, the samurai death, by cutting his stomach open and then having one of his cadets chop off his head. It happened on November 25th, 1970. He was 45. Unreal. Now, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Mishima didn't kill anybody unless you consider the first cadet who tried to chop off his head, failed, and subsequently offered his head to be chopped off as well by the second cadet who finished off both he and Mishima, though of course I imagine in reverse order. But Mishima's whole desire was not, if we are to trust his writing, to kill another person. It was for himself. It was to die, unforgettably. He was a true romantic, the one to end all others. And in a way you sort of see the demented consequences of romanticism pushed to their ugly logical extreme in his behavior. The guy had such a fervor of idealism it pours out of his novels. Fucking floods off the pages. Just explodes off the damn books. I mean, it is like nothing you've ever read. But when it collides with reality, with the reality of culture, fame, social expectations, masculinity and gender roles, existential anxiety, unfulfilled desire, boredom, and the prime fear of this book's protagonist, the relentless and unsparing fact of aging, well, this is what happens. You see, Mishima loved control. He was the ultimate type A. In his suicide, in his destruction of himself, in his manly, epic, romantic fashion, it was a way for him to take control. He wrote the ending to his story, so to speak. The reality of it was sort of sad and manipulative, anticlimactic in some ways, as, I mean, of course, it has to be. Because he was sort of heckled on the balcony when he gave his speech. It was sort of like, fuck you, get down. But the political motives weren't real. It was theater. This was about his death. It was very personal. It was about staging the appropriate scene for his death, like a real-life film. Anyways, yeah. Star by Yukio Mishima. Better than food, no doubt. So who's gonna get it for the coffee lottery? For those of you who are new, the coffee lottery is where I take all of the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video to the show, and I place their names in this mason jar, and I pull out a name for every review I do, and I send whoever's name I pull out a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And got a giant bag of Brazilian coffee that I can't wait to break open and roast, and it's gonna be delicious, I'm sure. So if you'd like to get in on that, you could head over to the description box below and click on the link, or go to patreon.com/books-are-better-than-food and donate $5 or more per video. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you. If you donate $1 or more per video, you get access to patron-only reviews, plus the Better Than Friday newsletter that I send out, which is just 5 things that I'm interested in at any given time. I send it out every Friday. Could be music, could be books in the pipeline, could be films, articles, changes week to week. If you think we have similar taste, if you enjoy these reviews, I think you'll get a lot of value out of that, and there's a ton of them already up there, so you can just go through all these posts and check them out. And you'll get access to the Discord channel as well, which is just full of patrons who are just discussing books and stuff, and there might be a book club going on there, I'm not sure. But yeah, all of those things, and probably more in the future. So unfortunately, international shipping is not included. I wish I could do it because I have so many fans who are not American, and I'm sorry, it's just too pricey. It's really expensive to ship shit. Thank you very much to the patrons and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Darcy. Thanks a bunch, Darcy. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive Star by Yukio Mishima, plus some delicious coffee from Brazil. Great country. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this. It helps the algorithm get it to other people who would enjoy it, I hope. I'd very much appreciate it. Thank you. And you can also follow me and hit me up on Instagram, DM me, and let me know which books you think are better than food. Thank you very much for watching. Please always remember to bring a book wherever you go. All right. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.